to take this opportunity to welcome everybody for joining us tonight. And I want to special thank you to Dave Mandel and Dr. Blumenthal for really taking the time out, and not only taking the time out, really approaching us to offer this event. And it meant a lot of, because there's a lot going on in the community now, not only by us, and not only our community, but in all Jewish communities. And these are people that are sought after on a very high degree. So it's a tremendous courage for us that they're taking out from the time to be with us tonight. And before Dr. Blumenthal starts talking, I just want to share a small idea. I think it leads into everything that we're going through now, and especially for all the couples of a time through the time of this Nisoyin. The Raputna says in Pachad Yitzchak, it says, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha asher sasicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Hashem is acknowledging who he is, the one that took us out of Mitzrayim, and by Savudim with all the nisim and the fluids that he did at that time. And Raputna says there's another pasuk in Devarim, Anoichi Hasper Aspai Puna b'yom. Hashem says, I am going to hide not only hide, the double hiding, to hide myself in that day. He's also using the word anoichi over there, that it's going to be me that's going to be hiding. So the Putna asks, what's the difference between the two anoichis? And he gives it with an example. He says that there was somebody standing in the woods at night in this house, and there was 5 people standing outside. And he had 2 guests that were with him inside the house. And he went over to both of those guests, and he said, it's pitch dark outside. I want you to go out at separate times and tell me who the 5 people are that are standing outside the house. The first person, he gave a candle, a lit candle, for him to go out. And the person took the candle, went outside. Within 5 minutes, he was back, and he told them who the 5 people are that's standing outside. The second person, he didn't give any candle. He told him, go outside and tell me who the 5 people standing outside. And he went outside, and so he asked this person, the second person, he didn't give him a candle, and he asked him to go outside and tell him who the 5 people are. This person went out without any candle, pitch dark forest. How is he going to figure out who these 5 people are? He started talking to them, started listening to who they are, where they come from. And through spending some time with them, he figured out who they are, and came back into the house and told the person who those 5 people are. The Hutna says, in the morning, when it's light outside, the person that had the candle didn't gain anything. He's the same person that he was before, because he didn't have to put in any effort. He didn't have to develop any skills in order to figure out who that person is, who those 5 people are. The second person that went out without the candle has now a new chish, a new talent, that he can try to speak to people and figure out who they are and understand what they're all about. So he says, of course, the person with the candle was much easier for him. He says, that's Anoichi Hashem Elokecha asher sasicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I'm the God that took you out with wonders and nisim. I showed myself to you. There's nothing needed from the person to figure out who Hashem is when Hashem is out there up front and showing himself for everybody. When Hashem hides himself, then you find out who you are, what your belief is. Because you don't have everything to come to tell you who Hashem is. You have to start figuring it out. You have to start listening to every single thing that's happening around you, why it's happening, where it's happening, what's happening to other people, and start figuring it out. And I think that's the matzav that we are in now, where everybody is basically for themselves. Everyone is in their own bubble, as they call it. and everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. And somebody asked me, like, what do I think the reason for this, what's happening over here? And I said, there's no blanket that you could say, a certain Rabbanim say it's because of this, because of that. I think it's everybody's at home because everybody has to deal with their own issues, with their own things, how to become better and how to find Hashem in their own life, in their own home. And I think our couples are really dealing with this, not only now at this time. I think they're really dealing with this a whole year because they don't have really to talk to. The only place really where they can open up to is the people of a time and the people that help a time. So on that note, I would just like to thank again David and Dr. Blumenthal for being there for the couples, to answer the questions, to give a little bit insight. Everybody should be able to find exactly what the reason for them is and how to be able to move on Niyat Hashem in life, and Niyat Hashem, hopefully Niyat Hashem, or everybody will share the simchas with all of us together. Dr. Blumenthal.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rabbi Rosen. And with your reshus, I'm addressing you today since I will be, I guess, referencing some Torah sources, and I do so certainly with your indulgence. And a special thank you for all the work you do, the remarkable work you do for a time, and also for your Rebbitzin and the hours and work that you put in. It's truly an honor to collaborate with you. I'd also I also want to thank myself, thank our OHEL CEO, David Mandel, and our Presidium, Mel Zapp and Jay Kestenbaum, that make it possible for me to be able to give these kind of workshops. And as well to thank our tech team, who try to imagine what this would be like if we didn't have them at our disposal to help us with all of the technology that's necessary to run a program like this, and in general, to remain in touch and to communicate with one another. I was told when we first originally planned this webinar, the thinking was, or I guess the focus, if you will, the focus was that the fertility treatments have been suspended because the hospitals are, if you will, are just flooded with COVID-19 cases, and there's really, the staff does not have the time or the even mental energy to focus on anything other than COVID-19, and that would be a focus of our talk. Baruch Hashem, I was informed 2 days ago that now, as things seem to be getting better, and hospital is able to address other medical issues as well, that many fertility centers are reopening, and if they haven't reopened yet, that they're on the brink of reopening, and that perhaps the basic premise of our talk is outdated. It is my wish and prayer that all the other webinars that we've been giving during this coronavirus crisis should be very soon outdated too, and that we can have, again, communal life and togetherness, and free of the degree of worry that we have been consumed with over these past few weeks. Now, but it's still relevant, and it's still what we have tried to do with OHEL, is address the very specific needs of different populations that are in their own unique way facing hardships with this coronavirus situation. We are running now currently 5 bereavement groups, 4 for people who lost parents, 1 for people who lost siblings. We're about to start a widow group. We have done webinars for older singles, for educators, for people who have been who experienced bereavement, for people who this week we're doing one for people who have supposed to reach milestones or celebrations that have to be either canceled or somehow celebrated or commemorated not in the way or fashion that that many people had hoped. So we're trying to address specific issues, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. And again, I join Rabbi Rosen in commending our CEO, David Mandel, for thinking of this, that again, this is a subset of the population that will have its own unique challenges as we're facing this crisis. And that's those who are, involved in fertility treatments or are struggling with infertility. So what I'm going to do is try to identify some of the issues that we're aware or we're surmising are relevant. And it's not just going to be hand-wringing. Those of you who heard me speak before, I always do try to at least address some ways of coping or managing the situation. In Eicha, the Navi Yirmiyahu says very aptly, Hayesh machov k'machov vi. Is there a suffering? Is there a pain that is like my pain? And every pain is unique. There are no two pains that are alike. And everybody's situation is unique. And again, as I said, universally, everybody who is confined, afflicted with the coronavirus, or lost jobs or income, lost loved ones, each one is experiencing it in their own unique way, but even within the same subset, even within the same paradigm of a particular group, everybody experiences it uniquely. And in fact, I often recall when I think about this, an experience I had much earlier in my career, at which time I was involved with the interviewing of Holocaust survivors, the video testimony of Holocaust for Holocaust survivors. And the way the setup was that there would be a morning interview of about 3 hours. There'd be 2 interviewers, and then there'd be a lunch break, and there'd be an afternoon interview, again, 3 hours. And the pair would switch off. So if, let's say I was doing the morning one with Rabbi Rosen. Rabbi Rosen might be the primary interview in the morning, and I would sort of help out. And then the afternoon, I'd be the primary interviewer, and Rabbi Rosen would help out. And sometimes siblings would come. 2 brothers, 2 sisters, brother and sister, let's say, would come to give testimony. And one would have the morning, one would have the afternoon. They'd come together, spend the day together. And after we did the morning one, when this first happened, when it came to the afternoon, I figured this is going to be a rerun. After all, they grew up in the same home together. They were deported to the camps together. They survived. They stayed together. They live together now. So the story should really be identical, and yet should not come as any surprise. Even though the actual facts were the same, everybody's experience of such extreme circumstances was very unique. There are 2 very distinct interviews. And the same thing is true here, that everybody struggled with the situation. And of course, the more extreme the situation, the more individual we become. And therefore, everybody's experiencing uniquely. I will try to address what I think are some of the issues, but I can't possibly perfectly address it for everybody, and I apologize for that now. And in fact, that's part of the loneliness of human suffering. When people are in pain, when people are facing huge challenges, the experience is very lonely because people don't get it. And so there is this loneliness. Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik once commented that when he had a very serious operation, I think it was in the late 50s, they even, I think, postponed his oldest daughter's wedding. And he described how the night before his surgery, when his family bid him goodbye, how he realized that even those close to him don't really get it, don't know what it's really like. And he said he finally understood the pasuk we say on the David Hashem Ori, Ki avi ve'imi azavuni v'Hashem yasfeni, that my mother and father abandoned me and Hashem gathered me up. And he said, what do you mean, mother and father? What mother and father abandons their child? But when you're having hardship, even those closest to you just don't get it. And it's all you have is Hashem, as Rabbi Rosen mentioned. And in fact, he said it very aptly. He said, I'm a lonely being, in lowercase, facing the loneliest being, in uppercase. And that's very much today. So again, I will try to address issues, but I have to, again, mention that I'll certainly be off. Now, one of the things to keep in mind also, when there's a compounding of different types of hardship or struggles, is what we often refer to as the mathematics of trauma. A colleague of mine often facetiously says that 5 out of 4 psychologists don't know math, but there is a very unique math of trauma and hardship. Suppose I give the coronavirus a value of 2, and the fertility struggle is a value of 2. 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. 2 plus 2 equals 8. And if there's additional struggles and hardships, then 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 28. And so any hardship on the heels, piggybacking on another one, grows exponentially. My mother, Shalom, who was a survivor of 7 concentration camps and had a treasure trove of Yiddish sayings, And one of them, which I will not say in Yiddish out of respect for the language, but one of them was that when a poor man has a hernia, there's a pimple on it. And that's just her way of saying, or that the expression, the way of saying that there is this compounding factor. So having these two struggles at the same time, without even some of the unique issues that we're going to get into, makes it all the more difficult. There's also a very big part of this experience, as you know, is waiting and hoping. Now, I want to talk a little bit in that context of the waiting and the hoping that I'm sure everyone has or more likely is currently experiencing, everyone who's online now, to talk a little bit about the difference between objective time and the perception of time, because they're two very different experiences. There is such a thing as objective time. 60 seconds make a minute, 24 hours make a day, 7 days make a week. You can't negotiate that. That's set, that's physics, that's in nature. And yet we experience time very differently. This is a very timely topic. There's a lot of what's being written now about those who are quarantined or sheltered in, that the remaining confined to your home alters your sense of time. And people are very much reporting that what day of the week is it? What part of the day is it? You lose that sort of sense because time is altered by the lack of stimulation, by the lack of your typical kind of schedule. A similar study was once done where they interviewed police officers who had participated in the shootout. Okay, so your typical scene, right? So a bank robber robs a bank, he runs out, the police show up, and they pull out their guns and the shootout, and it's over. And they asked the police officers, how long was this shootout? And pretty consistently, police officers overestimated how long it had taken. The average shootout goes for about 1.5 minutes, I think, I don't remember, and many of them estimated it as taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And the reason was that so much happened in such a short contained period of time that they experienced it as taking longer. We have a similar phenomena when especially kids are on the computers, on video games, or on their computers, devices. It alters your sense of time. So they think they've been on for 10 minutes and they've been on for an hour, which of course poses problems in terms of discipline, et cetera. There's another reason, I don't want to go into it now, why that happens. But our perception of time is very different than our actual experience of time. And when you're waiting for something, and when you're anxious for something to happen and it just doesn't happen right away, that's a snail's pace. That's a very slow moving time, is experienced as very long. Just to give another example, okay? If you've ever been in a situation where you're doing a vigil for someone who's dying, or even a funeral, it's endless. It goes on forever. A wedding flies by, you don't even know what happened. And therefore, when you're waiting, like many people are here, and hoping and waiting for test results, or waiting for maybe a new type of treatment, or waiting to see if a certain intervention is going to work, and that gets delayed and that gets postponed, people may say to you things like, oh, it's just a few weeks in a lifetime. What's the big deal? It feels like forever, and every second and every minute and every day seems interminable. And therefore, it's only when your dreams are fulfilled does quote unquote time fly. But while you're waiting for them to happen, it's a very slow, long period. And therefore, even though you could say this was only a few weeks, and even though you could say, look, we've been trying for months, years, what's a few weeks? A few weeks is a lot of time. By the way, I should mention that if anybody has input or questions, that probably the best way to do it, we have about 46 participants and everybody is muted. So there's a chat option on your phone or on your computer, and you can submit a chat question. You can do it privately if you don't want people to know. And I will try to address some of those questions at the end. We'll have some time probably at the end if people are courageous enough to want to open up and ask a question. Okay. Then there's another part, which is the loneliness. And loneliness is something very real. Loneliness is not just the state of mind. Loneliness is an experience that can be very painful and is even actually bad for your health. I mean, a great deal of the focus in a general sense right now in the work that we're doing is on the loneliness of the elderly, and it's very real. It's a palpable loneliness for those who are who are not active right now, maybe widowed, whose lives center around their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and now cannot see them or visit them, and may not be as home with some of the technology and the devices in order to connect that, albeit in a compromised kind of way. So, but loneliness is a very big part of this. And when you're alone together in a house or an apartment, which was supposed to be filled up with children, and it's just the two of you, that experience, that apartment can feel cavernous. That's not just empty. It's a very empty feeling, which again, more so perhaps than previously, when you were able to leave, when you went to work, when you were in and out, when you went to Minyan, it didn't feel that much. But when you're cooped up like that, the emptiness and the loneliness is very intense. And the other loneliness that always happens in situations of people who have hardship is that other people don't get it, they can't relate to it. And the other thing also, which is just equally bad, is the well-meaning or seemingly harmless things people say that are really very painful and really reflect an invalidation of your experience. And I will tell you that one of the things that I have learned during this coronavirus and in the work that I do, how important validating people's pain is, how important it is. I cannot tell you how many sessions I've had over these last few weeks where people are presenting to me insurmountable problems, insurmountable pain, and I have nothing to suggest to them that would relieve them, but merely listening with them and validating it for them, how incredibly helpful that has been. But unfortunately, we're not very good at that. And so some of the loneliness may be exacerbated by, again, the even well-intended, but painful things people will say. But there's another, I think, loneliness or another painful experience for the people who are online now, which I will admit, personally, I didn't even think of myself until I started mentally preparing what I was going to say tonight. But as you know, there's a lot of communication online and a lot of postings, some of them very imaginative, some of them are very funny, which is an important part of this experience, is the humor. But many people are posting complaints, jokes, suggestions, how to cope with this insurmountable experience of having children home all day, not going to school, how everybody's getting on top of each other, how you have to constantly entertain them, keep them busy, the whole business with this remote schooling, how nobody understands it, nobody gets it, it's not working. You hear boundless complaints and jokes about it. Believe me, I think most, if not everybody who's online now would love to have that problem. And that hurts. And maybe it's being overdone. And maybe people should think before they post such things that there are people who would be very happy if they had a slew of kids killing each other, wrecking the house, complaining endlessly about boredom because they're confined to the home. For them, it would be a blessing and not worth complaining. And again, I think that may further intensify the feeling of loneliness, of feeling apart from others. So what can we do? So let me talk a little bit about that. And again, as I said, I hope to adequately address it and then open it up for questions and comments as well. First of all, it's real. This is a terrible situation. The situation you're in is terrible. The situation, this whole coronavirus thing, is painful and scary, and we can't sugarcoat it. We're very invested in solving problems. We live in a day and age when there's so much that we can take care of. I mean, medicine has made incredible advances. We have technology. Anything we want is at our fingertips. I sometimes reference as an example, in order to get a doctorate, I have to do what's called a dissertation. I do an original piece of research. When I did it, I don't even want to say how many years ago, but when I did it, what it took to get, because you have to do a literature review, you have to go through just about everything, if not everything that was written about your topic. And as your first chapter of your dissertation, go down to the library, pull up old newspapers, old magazines and articles or the journals. And if they didn't have it, they'd have it on microfiche, which you have to kind of roll and look at. And if you want to keep a copy, it costs an arm and a leg. Today, my younger colleagues who are writing dissertations can click a mouse a few times and everything comes to them. It can come organized. They don't even have to even organize it. all the material comes in. So we're very used to solutions, and we're used to problems being solved. That's out the window, because today we're facing, as I indicated, many kind of problems that are just, there's no solution. And certainly even the biggest experts are totally lost about this, what is the virus is, what trajectory it's going to take, how it's caught, whether we should be getting back into our communal life, not getting back into communal life. And we're overwhelmed. This is a tidal wave. And just validating, acknowledging and accepting that this is a very trying times. And again, coupled with the struggles that everybody online here are engaging with, is in and of itself part of the refuah. And I cannot, again, I mentioned it earlier, much of what I do is just listen. Much of what I do is just validate, and I will do the same thing. Valid and validate it for each other. Cry. Bemoan your faith. It's legitimate. It's interesting how we have this mishigas in our community that we talk about people being strong. Strong means being stoic, being unemotional. Well, I would suggest anyone who thinks that being strong is being unemotional, they should go to the Sefer Bereshis and look at the Avos who experienced every emotion under the sun. They were sad, they were afraid, they had trauma. Probably what differentiated them from us is what they did with those emotions, but they had them. You can be upset. You can talk about it and just talk it over with your spouse. Or for that matter, as Rabbi Rosen mentioned, reach out to the other members of this organization, people that you've met at the weekend who will get it. And commiserate. It's painful, it's terrible, it's unbearable. And merely doing that will make it somewhat more tolerable. There's a study that I'm quoting, I think it's the only thing I'm quoting in every presentation I'm giving. But there was a number of years ago, researchers took college freshmen for $10 will do anything, and asked them to participate in a study. And what they did was they took them to a very steep hill, and they gave them a very heavy backpack, and they told them they wanted them to climb the hill. But before they climb the hill, they should estimate how hard it is to climb the hill. The only difference being that one group climbed the hill alone, and the other one climbed it with a friend. And pretty consistently, the people who climbed the hill with the friend estimated the hill as not as steep or difficult as the ones who climbed it alone. And a lot of what we're doing nowadays, and a lot of what you need to do, is find someone to climb the hill with. The hill is there. We can't get rid of it. The backpack is heavy. We can't get rid of that. But if you're climbing it together, you're climbing it as a couple, or you're climbing it as friends, the hill just won't seem so big. And that's a very big thing. That's a very big aspect of this period and of the struggle, of both struggles that people on the audience are dealing with. But distract yourself as well. You cannot deal with something 24/7. It gets to be too much. You need distractions as well. And distractions can take many different forms. A distraction can be, every once in a while, buy an engaging game to play. It can mean reading an interesting book. It can mean ordering online, ordering something that you can barely afford. I'm reminded of the Rabbi in my community who defined Zionism as Reuven telling Shimon to make aliyah with Levi's money. I'm telling you how to spend your money, but indulge yourselves. Have some fun. Have some recreation. You need a break from it as well. In fact, I might even propose to you, if I was going to suggest perhaps possible silver lining from all this, for those of you who are engaged in fertility treatments or in the effort to have a child, that sometimes getting away from it is good. Sometimes having a few weeks where you're not consumed, where you can't be consumed with the medical interventions, allows you to come back to it with a fresh mind, maybe with a little bit more enthusiasm, which can help. So, but do and talk about it, deal with it, and take breaks from it. And by the way, take breaks from each other. Again, maybe if there was children and different those more consuming responsibilities, you would more naturally set up schedules where you're not busy with each other. But again, when they aren't, you may be spending a lot of time together in a small apartment for all that matter, possibly. It's interesting that this past week, through my work at Yeshiva University, where I did a webinar for recently married, for very young couples, many of whom are living in tiny apartments in Washington Heights, barely furnished, who are now suddenly confined to their apartment. And part of what we had to talk about, I did it with one of the mashgichim, was you got to be apart a little bit. You got to find your little corners, get apart, come back together. It's not necessarily healthy to be on top of each other. So it's important to be involved, deal with it, and also get away from it. Okay, brace yourself for the well-meaning, we mentioned it earlier, and the incredibly dumb things people will say. And filter, you have to filter. I'm gonna say almost in a sort of metaphoric kind of way, there's two types of masks you have to wear. You might have to wear a mask so you don't inhale droplets of coronavirus, but there's another mask you have to wear, which maybe is over your ears and your eyes. So don't always walk by the playground. Don't read every single post of people suffering so much because their kids are all over them. You don't have to. It's sort of like filter for yourself and protect yourself from some of the information that may be painful and may make your life harder. Your life may be hard enough, and you don't necessarily have to do that. Let me talk a little bit about dreaming and about hoping, or about imagining yourself holding a baby and nurturing a child and raising children. For some people it's good, for some people it's ill-advised. For some people that imagining it, fantasizing it keeps them going. And we have to do that. I remember when I'm not saying it's comparable, but I remember when I finally got my doctorate, there was an orals, there was a meeting with several of the professors who were overseeing my dissertation. And it's really more of a formality. And if they approve your dissertation, you're a doctorate. And I remember when I walked out, when it was all over, and they all congratulated me, congratulations, doc, congratulations, doctor. And I walked out and I said, you're the same schmo you were when you came in. What just happened? I'm no different. I don't have a halo on my head. But because I was working so hard for it, I spend a lot of time imagining how incredible it will be when I get that doctorate. It wasn't anything so incredible. Now your situation is much more profound and different, but it sometimes helps to picture it, imagine it, reverie. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not denying reality. If we didn't have the capacity to dream, if we didn't have the capacity to, in our mind's eye, to imagine positive outcomes, we wouldn't be able to endure what we go through. I'll share a story. I remember a number of years ago, I was younger, and an older colleague of mine asked me to cover her patients while she was on vacation, and I was very flattered. And while she's away, I just how long ago was, there was pre-cell phones, and my beeper went off, and it was a number I didn't recognize. It was one of her patients who was acutely suicidal, and I didn't even know who she was. I didn't know her issues or anything. Imagine what that was like. And again, everything I'm saying is just making her feel more miserable. And finally, she's screaming at me, saying, Dr. Blumenthal, tell me, why should I live? Why should I live? And finally, I must have been Siyata Dishmaya. I thought of something, and I said to her, my mother survived Auschwitz by watching the sunset. She said, if there's something that beautiful in the world, it can't all be bad. Well, sometimes you have to seek out the sunsets in Auschwitz. But for some people, it's not the right thing. For some people, to imagine it, to get excited, and then to be awoken to the current reality of the person's life. Please, everybody should mute their phones if there's background noise. It's distracting. Okay, but okay, good, thank you. When the reality hits home, and once it becomes a reality, then sometimes it can be too painful. So you have to know yourself, and you have to know what works. And by the way, that raises another similar issue, which is what happens if dreaming and talking about it is great for the wife and terrible for the husband, or vice versa. It's an interesting phenomena that when couples share a struggle, there's a natural anticipation that you're going to cope with it the same way. And sometimes husbands and wives cope very differently. I remember one parent, it was a different situation, but it was also a shared hardship. And she metaphorically said it very well. She said that her husband and her said, we're on the same roller coaster, but I'm in the first car, he's in the last car. So sometimes I'm going up and he's going down. Sometimes I'm going to the left and he's going to the right. So we're in the same roller coaster, we're not necessarily going the same way. And that's part of the challenge, is to find that middle ground, or to defer to the other from time to time for ways and cope, and manners and ways to cope. Okay, and another, and then maybe with this I'll conclude and open up for comments and questions. But the other way of coping with this is to come up with some perspective. Come up, and again, Rabbi Rosen alluded to it, but some way in which you can take these very difficult times, again, compounded by the personal challenges that you have, the familial challenges you have, and give it a perspective that might make it less difficult. Sometimes we refer to that as meaning making. Sometimes it's like mining from the experience, something that can make it more tolerable. And again, that's a highly individual experience. And I don't think we can, anybody can prescribe one for what might work for one person might be toxic for the other. But I'll suggest one that came to my mind, and maybe that'll be helpful. And if it is, I hope so. And if it isn't, please disregard what I said. But what I would like to call, I'm going to call it pulling a Rabbi Akiva. Now, we all are familiar with the very famous story of Rabbi Akiva it's part of a siyum for, I think, for two Masechtas, maybe more, I don't remember offhand, but we very often hear it when we go to a siyum because it's the end of Masechtas. But the famous story of Rabbi Akiva and three of his fellow Tanoim were visiting the Har HaBayis and saw a fox running through the Kodesh Kodashim, through the holiest part of the Beis HaMikdash, and the other three started to cry, and Rabbi Akiva laughed. And Rabbi Akiva, they said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Well, that was the nevuah. The nevuah was that foxes would run through the Beis HaMikdash, and if that nevuah happened, then certainly the nevuah that the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt and that will all be redeemed can happen as well." And then they said, they said, "Rabbi Akiva, you comforted us and you comforted us." So let's look at this coronavirus and let's look what happened. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're living at a time when we think we're really in control, when we have incredible, even just in the area of fertility, the remarkable medical advances that have been made, what we can do with technology, how we can travel around the world, how we can communicate any place in the world in a matter of seconds with drones and with cameras. I mean, what we think everything can be handled. We think we're really running the show. And guess what? Hashem pulled the plug. He introduced this imperceptible, this microscopic virus, and shut down the world. Literally shut down the world. The trillion-dollar economies are gone. People can't travel. People, governments and all the great scientists are, as I said before, scratching their heads, can't figure this out. And world leaders are confused, contradictory recommendations, can't figure out whether do we restart the economy, do we encourage safety precautions instead. And the world was, as I said, Hashem shut the world down and took away any control or any of the wisdom that we have. So if Hashem can do that, he can open it up as well. And that it reminds us that nothing is impossible and should give us, in a paradoxical kind of way, like for Rabbi Akiva, should give us hope, and hope that just as Hashem can shut the world down, he can open it up and he can make anything possible. And what all the scientists say, or medical experts say, is highly unlikely or impossible, can very easily become a distinct possibility. So it's on behalf of OHEL and the time, we're hoping and praying that not only will, first of all, those afflicted by this virus will have a refuah shlema, that will be soon relieved of this and be able to resume a communal life, but also with that same boundless power and omnipotence that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, that everybody on this line will soon be surrounded by a fulfilling and joyous family, and we'll have all the simcha and the hardships of childbearing that are so pronounced now and that we see so much of today. So I'm going to I'm going to open up now. If anybody wants to, let me just see. There's one chat. Okay. So there is actually a private question that came in, and for obvious reasons, private. A couple wrote that they have one healthy embryo and the fear of the virus is frightening for us to transfer during COVID-19. It took us 2+ years to get to this place. I think this is to some extent a medical question. Is there a risk to the embryo, which I cannot comment on? I think that the doctors, I mean, again, everybody is under the care of highly expert fertility experts. But let's say, hypothetically, the doctor says, no, there's nothing to worry about. This will be done in a completely sterile setting, nowhere near COVID. And the fear still exists. I think that's where it sort of maybe shifts over from the physician to the psychologist. And that's a very real experience. The interesting thing is, many of us anticipate that this will be over, this situation will end, whether, let's say, the doctors discover a cure, a vaccine, or whatever, again, maybe just disappears, and we're just going to go back to the life that we had. And it's not so simple. First of all, it's highly unlikely we will, after a crisis of this magnitude, go back to the life we had. But even so, the research shows from people who were to varying degrees quarantined, when the need for the quarantine isn't there anymore, elements of the quarantine persist. In other words, in one way of putting it, and I've often put it this way, is that the brain changes, transforms much more slowly than reality does. And since we are consumed for fear of this highly virulent disease, the notion that it could impact on an embryo, even though scientifically doctors say it wouldn't, again, it's for the doctors say, not for me, that you may still perceive it that it would be a very human response, because our brain now has sort of adjusted to the presence of this danger, and it's going to take a longer time for us to either relinquish this danger, or to accept that the danger isn't present when the danger really isn't present, even though the doctors say so. And truthfully, also, I think compounding that, which may be relevant to this question as well, is I think we're aware that how confounded and lost the doctors are. That what was factual or was perceived as factual a few weeks ago is not now. Look, for a very long time we were hearing that children are unaffected by this, that they have very mild symptoms. Now it's coming out that there is still a minority, but children who have inflammatory responses that are very dangerous and have even resulted in death. So I can understand that people would be wary at this time to engage in such a delicate medical procedure. But again, I think we have to rely on the physicians, and the physicians are doing, like all of us, as best they can. And I think if the physician assures you that this is safe and will be insulated, you may have to process it and allow your brain to adjust, but probably you should trust that medical advice. Let me see if there are any other questions, or again, if somebody are comfortable unmuting their phone and asking questions directly, that would be fine. Otherwise, please rely on the chat. And again, a question can be submitted privately. I'll wait a minute or two. Usually the first person is the most, it takes the most courage. Let me just mention also, since I referred to the ambiguity, maybe while some people are thinking about what they might want to comment, a very big part of the stress that's going on now with the coronavirus is the ambiguity, is the not knowing what exactly, what's going to be the course of this illness. And it's important, first of all, if we knew, then we could plan better. But the other factor is that ambiguity is in and of itself stressful. And in fact, the research, again, on couples struggling with fertility is that when the reason is known, even if the reason is a serious one that might be hard to bypass or work through, it's less stressful than when it's just for totally unknown reasons. So not knowing how things are going to evolve in the next few months, years, etc., is in and of itself a distinct stressor. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Okay, somebody. Okay, there was another private one. Oh, that's wonderful. Good question. Oh, that's an excellent question. I should have thought of that myself. Okay, very good. So again, it's a private questions, but I think this may be more universal. All our appointments, we have to go by ourselves, by procedures. How can our husbands, it could be wives also, because there might be husbands getting treatments, be more involved? In my situation, my husband would be staying at home. There is no reason for him to wait in the car. excellent question, excellent point, because they are certainly minimizing people that are entering physicians' offices and hospitals in the spirit of the social distancing that is necessary at this point. And people are going alone to hospitals. I mean, many of the calls we're getting through the OHEL trauma team are people who've had to go, sometimes some had to go for other medical procedures, emergencies, or urgent interventions, and we're alone for hours in emergency rooms and in doctors' offices. And that certainly significantly increases the stress because, again, it's like climbing the mountain. And the mountain is easier to climb when someone's with you, particularly situation when it's a husband and wife in the same predicament. So it does make it far more difficult. Again, I have no solution except that you should try as much as possible to create a togetherness in the situation through technology, through phones and Zoom and everything else, so that you're together as much as humanly possible. Even texting. So you try to recreate that togetherness, but it's not being weak, and it's not any fault of yours that you can't just go on your own. You're not being a baby. It's in situations like this, it makes a very big difference when you can go with someone else. Okay, another private one. What's the best way to explain to parents how hard it is to be locked up, just the two of us alone for so many weeks? So let me explain to you first, this is an excellent question, why it's so hard. I mean, your parents are intelligent people, competent people. Why can't they get that? Why can't they understand it? And there's I don't think a mental block to getting it. I think there's an emotional block. And my best guess is, from what I've seen in situations like this, is that it is so painful to the parents. And in truth, and I think you won't deny this, very often parents are not involved for reasons that fairly obvious, are sort of kept at arm's length about this. And they're aching for you that they don't want to know how difficult it is. So I don't know. So if you're trying to explain it, then logically, you're really not talking to the cause, because it's really an emotional issue. And perhaps if you address it emotionally, and perhaps if you just acknowledge for them how hard this must be for them to see how difficult this is for you. And even though it's not your primary concern, it does factor in the collection of heartache that your parents are also painting for you. But if you can address it at an emotional level, that'll be important. You know, I think another approach might be, and we're recommending this for people who are having a very hard time with this situation, is none of us can predict the future. I often like to quote the great philosopher and theologian Yogi Berra, who used to say that prognosticating is very difficult, especially about the future. So we don't know how long this will be and how long this will be haunting us. But historically, most pandemics, even most crises, have a beginning, middle, and end. This will resolve. This will reach a point where we'll be able to resume our communal lives. Maybe different, but we'll be able to. And maybe that needs to be said as well to parents who can't understand it. It's not they can't understand it because they don't understand something. They can't understand. They can't allow themselves emotionally to understand it because it's too painful. Okay, another private question. Very interesting that all the questions are private. That says something about this struggle. With centers reopening and being talked about, there's a lot loss of privacy. Our family members never knew what we were doing, and now they're asking questions about our treatments and when we are restarting. Interesting. I wasn't aware of that's indeed the case, and that touches upon a very loaded issue for couples that I've worked with fertility issues, that very often they're not comfortable sharing with immediate family members, and sometimes they need those family members for financial support, etc. So you have that kind of paradox that you need their help and yet you're not sharing with them. But bottom line, this is your struggle. This is your mountain for you to climb, and you owe nobody any information that you're not comfortable sharing. And please, and for yourselves and for the family member, It's not a sign of a lack of affection. It's not a sign of a lack of trust. In fact, very often it's a sign of a tremendous amount of affection, that it just hurts too much to share. There's just too much pain and too much investment to be helpful. And therefore, it's in a way, it would almost be an insult if one could calmly just talk to their parents about something so incredibly personal and emotional. And therefore, it's a tribute to them that you don't. But it is, at the end of the day, you owe nobody anything. You owe nobody any explanations. You don't owe anybody any kind of divulging. It's yours, and you can share with whomever you want, and trust your instincts, because usually your instincts in a situation like this is right. One of the things I've observed over the years, I often call it the emotional adrenaline rush. I find that people who have hardship, people who are struggling, have like a bina yasera. They have a sort of intuitive sense what they need to do. And as the person who's supposed to be assisting, the more difficult the struggle, the more attentive I am to what the individual or couple intuitively feel that they need to do. And sometimes it makes no sense to me, but in the long run, I find out it does make, ultimately, I realize that it does make sense. And therefore, if your kishkas, if your guts say, I'm not sharing with them, I'm keeping with them, do so, but let them know this is not rejection. It's not because they're not good parents. In fact, often it's usually because they are wonderful parents. Okay, next private question. What are some of the strategies to keep family members involved, also maintain our privacy with fertility and life? Okay, so that question goes to the core. You don't have to be struggling with fertility to have that question. You know, when the first family was created by Hashem, when Hashem created Chava, and for the first time now there's a family, the Torah, very uncharacteristically, stops for an editorial comment. And there's the famous pasuk al Ken Ya'azav Isha Saviv V'Asimov V'Davak B'Shto V'Yulav Basar Echad. From henceforth, a man shall literally abandon his family, attach himself to his wife, and they will be like one. Rashi explains, they'll be like one. They'll have a child, and that's what hopefully it's going to happen to everybody here. But inherent in reaching that stage in life when you get married is your primary focus shifts from your parents, from your family of origin, to this new family that you're creating, to this new dyad, this new couple that you're creating, which means that more is going to be shared between the two of you than with your parents. That's the normal progression of life. So if you're comfortable to share a bit with them, you can share with them. But again, as I said earlier, it's yours. And a healthy and differentiated family should understand that from the day that they paid whatever money they had left in the bank account to make a wedding for you, your primary focus now is on each other and not in the family. And that's in a way the paradox of parenting, that if you do your job right, you get rid of them. And so therefore, so you're asking for strategies. Always do it in a loving and caring way. Always let them know if there's something they're asking you don't want to share with them, you say to them that I love you, you're wonderful parents. This is something I need to work on to preserve between me and my husband or me and my wife. And this is no slight to you. In fact, if anything, it's a testimony to the wonderful job you did as parents, because you raised me to be an independent, self-sufficient person. And that's what every parent dreams for. So yes, you can make it very clear to them. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to avoid them in a global sense because they're being intrusive. Sometimes parents have a hard time with that transition, just like children sometimes have a hard time with that transition. But if you're forthright and you say it in a loving and accepting way, unless the parents have some significant problems letting go, it'll work. But the main thing is let them know this is not a rejection of you and not any insult to you or slight to you as parents. And once you do that, I think it should work. I don't see any further questions unless somebody is going to post one still or wants to unmute themselves and ask something directly. That's
Dr. Blumenthal, it's David. May I comment?
Oh.
Earlier, Dr. Blumenthal mentioned that a week or two before coronavirus hit the world, the medical community knew very little about it. And as we listen to the news every day or two, we hear that the medical community is learning new information, which means that they simply don't know everything. We're all learning. Translated to infertility, it means that when the doctor tells you that you should stop, he's giving you an opinion. It's not God talking. You decide, you two decide as a couple when to stop. It's not when the doctors tell you that you have to stop because they don't know. 20 years ago and 10 years ago, there was so much not known about infertility that is known today. And Baruch Hashem, so many children have been born and things have changed. Dr. Blumenthal commented that being together for the last 8 weeks changes the world and it changes us. So we're in the New York time zone. There are many couples calling from outside of New York. In New York, the shelter in place continues at least for another 10 days to May 28th. The recommendation is you've been together for 8 weeks. You've had a lot of time to talk, to think, to be lonely. You're going to be home for another week. Make an active decision on the many things that Dr. Blumenthal commented as to how you're going to come out from this. Talk it out amongst yourselves. Do you want to continue treatment? Do you want to stop? What do you want to tell your parents? Are you making a decision that you're not? What do you want to say? Where do you want to go? It's like a new roadmap. Rejuvenate yourself. Re-strengthen yourself. Come out stronger from the last 8 weeks by speaking about what you're going to do, what your plan is. Hopefully you don't come out weaker, rejected or dejected or anxious, which is of course normal emotions that Dr. Blumenthal mentioned. But take the next week before you re-enter the world to say to yourselves, this is what we're doing. This is our plan. We are in charge of our plan, just as Dr. Blumenthal mentioned. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. That was very important. I have another question here. It's not as much a fertility question, but between female hormones, no structure to my day, I find I can get frustrated and irritable more easily. How are ways of dealing with hormones and COVID and everything? What are ways to self-regulate and to enhance the mood? I'm flattered you asked this question because it's a bombshell. Let me place it in the context that's relevant, that we've come across, and see how useful it is. One of the messages we're giving to the public during this COVID-19 crisis is what is going to be more so. So strengths are going to be bigger, your muscles will be bigger, but your vulnerabilities will be greater as well. And so therefore, I mean, you're talking about, in this case, a medically induced vulnerability, although every emotional state has a biological correlate. But this is related to the fertility treatments, and therefore, if the treatments are creating a greater irascibility or emotional lability, it's going to be all the more so when you're confined to the home and surrounded by tragic news, etc. It's just going to amplify. A lot of what we're doing now, and that's a message we're also giving to people out there, is we're not curing now. We're managing. You know, it's a metaphor example I give sometimes is, imagine someone's in the Midwest and they're about to be hit with a huge tornado and they board up all their windows and tie up all their furniture and hunker down in the safest part of the house, and suddenly, you know, so the husband says to the wife, you know, we have a leaky faucet downstairs. What are we going to do about it? You know, this is not the time to worry about the leaky faucet. So right now, we're going to do whatever's necessary to manage the situation until the situation can be corrected, or in your case, till it's no longer necessary. So, you know, whatever it takes, if you're finding that because of the hormone treatments, you're just overly responsive to things your husband does, stay apart a little bit, stay away from each other, give yourself space. Use a lot of humor. joke about it. Do self-regulatory kind of activities, whether it's meditation, light exercise, yoga, cheap novels, music. Let's, just marshal whatever works for you, and hopefully healthy things. In other words, not unhealthy things, not overeating, not screaming and yelling, but marshal what works for you. Both the COVID-19 and the hormonal treatments, again, as I mentioned earlier, beginning, middle, and end, are not forever. And a lot of what we're doing now is hunkering down, coping, until, God willing, this will soon be relieved of this. Maybe that's a good theme to end on, because I see our time is up. First, again, I want to thank ATIME, and I certainly can speak for them, saying that that they're available any and all times for any kind of assistance, whether it's medical advice or it's emotional support. We at OHEL don't have the medical advice piece, but we have an active trauma team that is available to anybody, no charge, for services with full confidentiality. And if you feel a need to, please feel free to avail yourself of the services that we have. It's on our website's TheraZoom. You can go on the OHEL website or contact Rosen or Rabbi Rosen, who know how to reach me, and David Mandel, and we'll be happy to be of assistance any way we can. And I wish everyone well. Everyone's loved ones and yourselves should be healthy. Those who are afflicted should have refuah shlema. And not only should we emerge from this as we were before, but in a more fortunate place and a more blessed place as well. Okay, thank you for listening, and wish everyone well, and have a good week. Good Shabbos. Okay, take care.